The snow had been falling since morning, quiet and patient, like it knew better than to ask for attention. It dusted the roof of my small house and settled on the narrow front steps I had shoveled twice already, my knees aching but my heart light. Christmas had arrived, and for a few hours I allowed myself to believe that warmth did not come from money, but from people. Inside, the house smelled of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and cloves. The old radiator hissed and clanked, doing its best against the cold, while the Christmas lights flickered softly along the window frame. They were cheap lights bought years ago on clearance, but they still worked, and that felt like a small miracle. The table was set carefully, not fancy, just clean. A white tablecloth I had washed and ironed myself. Plates that didn't quite match. Silverware polished until my fingers hurt. At the center sat a simple decoration, pine branches, a few red candles, and an ornament my daughter had made in kindergarten. Its paint chipped, but its memory priceless. This table had seen decades of meals. The quiet ones, lonely ones, and hopeful ones. Tonight, it would host laughter. Or at least that was what I told myself. The doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and smiled before opening the door, practicing the expression the way I always did. "Merry Christmas," I said. My daughter stepped inside first, her cheeks pink from the cold, her eyes still the same warm brown they'd been since childhood. She hugged me tightly. "Dad," she whispered, "it smells amazing." Behind her stood her husband, Daniel. He wore a tailored coat that probably cost more than my monthly pension. His shoes were spotless, his hair perfectly styled. He glanced around the house the way someone inspects a hotel room. Polite but critical. "Evening," he said, nodding once. Guests followed relatives, a couple of Daniel's friends, distant cousins I rarely saw. The house filled with voices, coats piled on chairs, laughter echoing off walls that weren't used to company. Wine was poured, compliments were offered. "This is cozy," someone said, surprised. I smiled and nodded, though Daniel smirked slightly, swirling his glass like he was at a business dinner instead of his father-in-law's home. We sat down. The table was fuller than it had been in years. Forks clinked against plates. The turkey was passed. For a moment I allowed myself to relax. I watched my daughter laugh, watched her eyes light up as she told a story from work. I noticed how Daniel interrupted her halfway through, correcting a detail that didn't matter. She smiled anyway, the way people do when they're used to being cut off. I said nothing. I never did. Daniel talked a lot about investments, about people he knew, about restaurants I could never afford. Each story somehow ended with him looking impressive, and of course, he said loudly at one point, "You have to keep moving forward. No point living small, right?" A few people chuckled. I focused on cutting my turkey, then Daniel raised his glass. "Actually," he said, "I just want to say something." The room quieted slightly. Heads turned. "I mean, Christmas is about gratitude," he continued, glancing around, "and I guess we should all be grateful that my father-in-law managed to pull this together." He gestured vaguely at the table. A pause, then laughter. Not cruel laughter, casual laughter. The kind that doesn't stop to think. My chest tightened. Daniel wasn't done. "Let's be honest," he said, leaning back in his chair, enjoying the attention. "He's a broke old man, doesn't really deserve this kind of celebration, does he?" The laughter came louder this time. Someone slapped the table. Someone snorted wine through their nose. I felt the sound wash over me like cold water. I looked at my daughter. She wasn't laughing. Her smile had frozen, confusion and embarrassment flickering across her face. But she didn't speak. Neither did I. I lowered my eyes to my plate, my hands steady despite the storm rising inside me. 60 years of work. 60 years of swallowing words. The table buzzed again, conversation resuming as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted. The candles flickered, And for the first time that night, Christmas felt cold. The laughter at the table faded into a dull hum, but Daniel's words stayed with me, echoing louder than any toast or clinking glass. I chewed my food slowly, tasting almost nothing. I had learned long ago how to sit quietly in moments like this, how to let insults pass as if they were harmless jokes. Silence had been my survival. I wasn't always old. I wasn't always broke. There was a time when my hands were strong and my back didn't ache every morning. I grew up in a house where money was rare, but responsibility wasn't. My father worked until his body gave out, and when he died, he left me two things: a patch of land no one wanted, and the belief that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he showed, but by what he protected. When my wife died young, that belief was all I had left. Raising my daughter alone was never part of the plan, but life doesn't ask permission. I worked wherever someone would hire me: construction, maintenance, night shifts that blurred into early mornings. I learned to fix things myself because hiring help wasn't an option. When the roof leaked, I patched it. When the heater failed, I stayed up all night repairing it with borrowed tools. Every decision I made was simple. Asterisk, does this help her? Asterisk, new shoes for her meant old ones for me. School trips for her meant overtime for me. I didn't complain. Complaining doesn't put food on the table. At night, when she slept, I studied, not books numbers. I learned slowly, carefully. Savings accounts, long-term investments, land values. I listened more than I spoke. People underestimate quiet men, and that was an advantage I never wasted. When my father's old land suddenly became valuable decades later, I sold it, quietly. I invested the money the same way I lived, patiently, invisibly. I never told anyone, not even my daughter. Money changes how people look at you. I didn't want that. I wanted her to love me, not what I could give her. Daniel entered her life like a storm wrapped in charm. He was confident, ambitious, always talking about growth and status. He made good money, he dressed well. Everyone approved. I noticed the way he spoke asterisk at asterisk people instead of asterisk to asterisk them. The way he measured rooms, the way others measure profit. But my daughter smiled when she was with him, and that mattered more than my doubts, so I stayed silent. When he joked about my old car, when he teased me for clipping coupons, when he spoke louder around me as if volume equaled importance, silence was easier than conflict. Years passed. My health slowed me down, but my investments grew. Every quarter, I reviewed documents late at night, my reading glasses sliding down my nose. I planned carefully, not for luxury, but for security. $1 million. Enough to ensure my daughter never had to choose between warmth and food the way I once did. I prepared the inheritance with a lawyer I trusted. It was clean, legal, thoughtful. Daniel was included not because I trusted him, but because I trusted my daughter's happiness. Or so I believed. That morning before Christmas dinner, I had sat alone at this same table, sunlight streaming through the window. I had read Daniel's last message to my daughter by accident. A careless screen left unlocked. Asterisk, he doesn't contribute anything. Asterisk, it read. Asterisk will be fine once he's gone. Asterisk, once he's gone. I folded the napkin carefully now, my hands steady again. Across the table, Daniel laughed loudly, already moving on from his joke, unaware that something inside me had finally broken, not in anger, but in clarity. Silence, I realized, had protected me long enough, but it would not protect my daughter. I glanced at the folder beside my chair. The time for quiet was ending. Dessert was placed on the table, but no one reached for it right away. Plates of pie cooled, steam fading into the air like the last breath of a lie. Conversation limped forward, forced and uneven, as if everyone sensed something unseen sitting among us. Daniel leaned back in his chair, satisfied with himself, scrolling through his phone beneath the table. He didn't notice the way my daughter's smile had vanished, or how her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her mug. I noticed everything: The folder beside my chair felt heavier than paper. It carried years of work, restraint, and quiet endurance. I had never planned to reveal it like this. I had imagined a gentle announcement, perhaps after laughter, perhaps in private. But dignity, once mocked, does not wait for the perfect moment. I stood up. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor, but the sound cut through the room sharper than any shout. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, heads turned. Even Daniel looked up, annoyed at first, then curious. "I'd like to say something," I said. My voice was calm. That surprised even me. Daniel smiled, indulgent. "Of course," he said. "Go ahead." I rested my hands on the table, hands that had been underestimated for decades. "I've been listening tonight," I continued, "and I've learned something important. A few people shifted uncomfortably." My daughter's eyes met mine, worried, questioning. "I've learned how I'm seen," I said, "as a man who has little, as someone who is irrelevant." Daniel chuckled softly, as if encouraging the room to laugh again. "I don't blame anyone," I added. I allowed that image to exist. The room grew still. I reached for the folder. "This document," I said, lifting it slightly, "is the reason I stayed silent for so long." Daniel straightened. "It is a legal inheritance agreement," I said clearly, "prepared 5 years ago, verified, filed." Murmurs rippled through the guests. $1 million, I continued, "set aside for my daughter and her husband." The word *million* landed like a dropped plate. Daniel's face changed, not dramatically at first, just a flicker, interest, calculation, hope. I opened the folder and turned a page. "This morning," I said, "after being reminded of my true value in this household, I made a revision." My daughter gasped softly. I held the document higher now, so everyone could see the signatures, the stamps. "The inheritance now belongs solely to my daughter," I said. "In full." Daniel stood halfway out of his chair. "Wait, in the event of divorce." I continued evenly, or continued marriage, Daniel receives nothing. The silence that followed was absolute. No breathing, no shifting, no laughter. Daniel's face drained of color, as if someone had erased him. His mouth opened, closed. He looked around, searching for someone to rescue him with a joke. No one moved. "You called me broke," I said, meeting his eyes for the first time in years. "And you were right." I paused. "I was broke in patience, broke in tolerance, and tonight I am finished pretending." My daughter stood up then, tears streaming down her face. "Not grief recognition, you knew," she whispered to Daniel. He said nothing. I slid the folder across the table toward her. "This was never about money," I said gently. "It was about respect." Daniel sank back into his chair, his confidence collapsing in real time. His expensive watch suddenly looked small. Useless, I hope. I added, "That tonight reminds us all. Wealth can be hidden, but character always speaks." No one laughed. No one clapped, but something far stronger filled the room. Truth. No one reached for dessert. The pies sat untouched, their sweetness suddenly out of place in a room heavy with truth. The candles flickered low, shadows stretching across faces that no longer knew where to look. The laughter that had once filled the house felt like a memory from another lifetime. Daniel was the first to break the silence. This is a joke," he said weakly, forcing a laugh that no one returned. "You can't just change things like that." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I already have," I said. Legally, the words settled deep. Daniel turned to my daughter, his eyes pleading now instead of mocking. "You're not really going to let him do this, are you?" She looked at him the way someone looks at a stranger who's been wearing a familiar face. "You already did this," she said quietly, "just not with papers." Her voice didn't shake. That was when I knew she would be all right. Guests began to stand, one by one, murmuring excuses. Coats being gathered with uncomfortable urgency. No one wanted to witness the collapse of a man who had been so proud only minutes earlier. Daniel's friends avoided his eyes. Respect, I had learned, disappears faster than money when the truth arrives. When the door finally closed behind the last guest, the house felt smaller, but lighter. The silence that remained was no longer heavy. It was clean. Daniel sat alone at the table, staring at nothing. His shoulders slumped. The man who had filled rooms with noise now seemed afraid of it. "I didn't mean it like that," he muttered. My daughter let out a long breath. "You said exactly what you meant," she replied. "You just didn't think there would be consequences." She turned to me then. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have seen it sooner. I reached for her hand. You saw it when it mattered," I said. "That's enough." Daniel stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "So that's it," he snapped. "After everything I've done." I met his gaze steadily. "You didn't lose money tonight," I said. "You lost the illusion that you were entitled to it." He left without saying goodbye. The door closed softly behind him, but the echo lasted a long time. Later, as I washed dishes and my daughter dried them beside me, she asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I smiled faintly. "Because I wanted you to choose love, not security," I said, "and now you can have both, on your own terms." That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone at the table. The ornament she'd made as a child caught the light, just as it always had. I thought about revenge. It hadn't come with shouting or humiliation. It hadn't required cruelty. It had come quietly through truth, timing, and dignity. The greatest revenge, I realized, wasn't taking something away. It was revealing who deserved it all along. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world gently. Evenly, no favorites, no judgment, just peace. And for the first time in many years, I felt truly wealthy.